So in the previous video, we spent some time talking about what quadratics are and how to identify them. And we learned it was something as simple as if it has an x squared in it, and that's the highest term, that'll be a quadratic equation. Now in this video, I want to talk more about the why. And when I mean why, I don't mean something along the lines of, why do your teachers make you learn about this? That's a question for them. I can't answer that. The why I want to answer is, why is it necessary to spend more time learning about this? Why can't we just use the tools of algebra we already know and love to solve these quadratic equations? And to answer this question, I'm going to be using some, I want to go back and show you how we've been solving equations and see how it works with quadratic equations. So let's take this equation, for example, 3x, let's do minus 5 equals 2x plus 7. I would tell you to take a moment and try to solve this yourself, but I'm sure every person on the planet here knows how this is done. The goal is to get x by itself. You would subtract 2x from both sides, and then you would add 5, and you would end up with x equals 12. Nothing too mystical about that. We all know how to solve that. Now, okay, let's look at a quadratic equation. Let's see if we can solve one of those using the same exact ideas. So I'll do this in pink here. So let's try this. 3x squared minus 6 equals 30. So this I will ask you to take a moment, try and solve it yourself, and see if you can do it. And okay, I'm assuming you've given it a shot, but the basic idea is the same. You just want to get x by itself, so you start off by dividing by 3 on both sides. You end up with x squared minus 6 equals 10. And then we just add the 6, we get x squared equals 16, and from there you square root both sides. And you have x equals plus or minus 4. So okay, you might be asking, we just solved a quadratic equation using all the tools of algebra that we're very familiar with. And it's true. For some quadratic equations, you can just solve them by putting x on one side and solving for it, and it'll work out just fine. But what about something like this? I'll do this one in green. We'll do x, we'll do this squared in yellow. X squared, let's say, minus 3 is going to be equal to 2x. So okay, you say to yourself, well, this one's super easy, same deal. Subtract by 2x, add 3, get all the x's on one side, and you end up with x squared minus 2x equals 3. Okay, super simple. Where do we go from here? Well, you could try dividing by x or something like that. You can't really square root because then you'd be square rooting the entire thing here, and that wouldn't work so well. You can't combine these terms because this one has a squared on it, this one doesn't. So where do you go? And it turns out quite quickly with these quadratic equations, the rules of algebra we've used so far don't really seem to work. We can't seem to get x alone on one side, just like we've done before. So what do you actually need to do? Well, this is where our special new ways of solving quadratic equations come in. It turns out that you actually want to put all this on one side and set it equal to 0. And from here, you can use any number of fun ways to solve a quadratic equation. I'll just demonstrate one really quick. It's called factoring. And the way you factor a quadratic equation is you just ask yourself, what two numbers multiply to this third number, but add to this number right here? So what two numbers multiply to negative 3 and add to negative 2? Well, there's only two numbers that multiply to negative 3. That'll be 3 and negative 1, or negative 1 and 3. And if you have negative 3 and positive 1, you'll get negative 2. So those are our solutions. So if you factor this, you'll end up getting x minus 3 times x plus 1 equals 0. You might ask, well, why is this useful? It turns out because these two things are being multiplied, these two terms are being multiplied, if we find an x that makes either of these terms 0, well, the whole thing is going to turn into 0, and we'll get 0 equals 0, which will be true. And we'll get into a little bit more about how to do this in the later videos, but I'll just show you briefly. It turns out the solutions are x equals 3 and x equals -1. Because if we plug in 3 into this equation, we get 3 minus 3. 0 times whatever is on the right equals 0. The whole thing will be 0. If we plug in -1 into this one, we'll get -1 plus 1. That'll be 0. This whole thing will be 0. 0 equals 0. And as you see here, we need special new ways of thinking, new mathematical tools to deal with some of these quadratic equations. Not all of them, as you can see, not all of them, but some of them will require that. And that's why we need to spend time learning how to factor quadratic equations, how to complete the square, and how to use the quadratic formula to solve these. In the next video, I'll be delving more into ways of solving these quadratic equations.